I'll go live. I think everybody can. Yeah, whoever's there can probably hear it. Okay,
Cool.
That's good. So, yeah, I've got my YouTube muted, so hopefully we won't get any kind of echo.
Yeah, I'm not watching anything.
Okay, great. Just give me a couple of seconds. Right.
I gotta somehow stay out of this spotlight. It's like right there.
Right in your face. Hey.
Hey, man.
All right. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Professional Novice with Ali A. Rizvi. My name is Ali A. Rizvi, and I am here today with my friend Jay Shapiro. So as you know, we've got 2 weeks left to go before the election. The Democrats are more anxious than ever. They think that there's going to be a repeat of 2016. A lot of their anxiety is being driven by this sort of post-traumatic stress that they have from what happened in 2016 when they were completely gobsmacked by what happened with the Trump win. This is despite all of the polling and the fundraising numbers that are coming out that are phenomenally more favorable to Joe Biden. So I have Jay Shapiro here. Jay Shapiro, in my opinion, and I'm going to embarrass you right now, he's an extraordinarily talented director and producer. He made the documentary Islam and the Future of Tolerance based on Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz's book. He also has done several previous documentaries like Opposite Field. And he also podcasts a great podcast called Dilemma that focuses on, I think it's mainly philosophical discussions you have on there. You've also done some shows with Coleman Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, he's technically the co-host, but with COVID, we sort of just like split off because it was just too complicated. But yeah.
Do check those out. The links to those things will be in the YouTube or wherever you're listening to this. You're going to hear it. We're going to talk about 2020 versus 2016, the similarities and the differences. So, and one of the reasons that, Jay, I think it's really good to have you on here is you had a really, really interesting thread where the way that you kind of look at things from a psychological / philosophical viewpoint. That's kind of what you were looking at Trump with. And there was an incident, I don't know, I think most of you have seen this video of Trump and who's the guy, the wrestling guy that he beats up outside
Vince
the ring?
McMahon? Yeah.
Vince McMahon, yeah. And he's like just basically punching him out outside the ring. And you saw that clip as a, I guess, metaphor would probably be probably as a representation of.
Yeah, it's not just that clip. I mean, we could go into it, but it's like a longer. Yeah. I mean, we could get into it because I mean, if people know the clip, they know what you're talking about. But to back up a little bit, you're right. I tend to analyze things from a little bit more of a zoomed out, philosophical, maybe psychological feels zoomed in, but more of a collective psychological narrative sense is how I've been approaching this and where that thread came from, of trying to understand really the psyche of not just Donald Trump, but the Trump voter, what it means for the nation that he was elected. And then in that particular sort of line of thinking, exactly who was elected, because I think people are still a little confused about who exactly Donald Trump is. Even 4 years into this, it's like, what the fuck is this thing that's happening here? And
like I think character.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think what makes total sense to this thing is using, and maybe it feels like too direct or picky of an analogy, but the character of the WWE, when we were kids, it was WWF, but WWE character of Donald Trump, in quotes. The storyline is the character that he believed himself to be. I think his entire life has been playing a character of himself. Now that we've seen his tax returns and everything, not that we needed confirmation of that, but he's a fraud. He's a fake. Like, it's not, this is all a character. It's a bit of a show. He believed who he was on The Apprentice, but all of that character, the character that he played in fucking Home Alone in that little like cameo, was still the same character of the rich, powerful business guy who goes in and sort of like makes things happen. That character on WWE is such a good analogy for what we saw in the 2016 election, and I think the psyche of the country. It was just so perfect. So if you back all the way up, I mean, his relationship with WWE started long before that clip that you're talking about. He hosted WrestleMania 4 and 5 at the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City in the 80s. This is 1988 and 1989. This is Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. Though that era, Donald Trump was there in the front row, wearing his tux, watching the whole thing, hosting the event, right? But he gets written into the show much, much later. You're talking like 2006, 2007 with Monday Night Raw. It was like the number one show on Monday nights, the wrestling show in the United States. And the character and the storyline, I might get some of the details wrong here, but it's so perfect. The storyline, as far as I really kind of know it and remember it, is Vince McMahon is the actual CEO of WWE. He's an actual millionaire and I think billionaire at this point. But he also plays himself as a character in WWE. Vince, I'm talking about here. He's a big muscly dude. He's like works out all the time. And he plays the role for the wrestling world as kind of the like douchey, aloof, meathead CEO that kind of hates his audience and makes fun of them, but like walks in with a swagger. But whenever push comes to shove, he's kind of like a wimp. Like he always backs away. He never wins a fight. He always like puts someone in between him and the real danger. He is the avatar for the wrestling fan base of like your boss who works out all the time and thinks he's a real tough guy and drives a fancy car, but really doesn't want to get his hands dirty and isn't actually going to do any of the work, right? He's that character. And Vince plays it incredibly well. He loves his own audience booing at him and that whole kind of thing. So that's his character. In the storyline, Vince is struggling financially with the WWE. And in comes Donald Trump. They wrote like a theme song for him. It was like this money, money, money song. He walks out with like, you know, women on both arms and comes walking into the arena. And he's going to cut a deal and like make a deal with Vince McMahon to save the WWE. And he buys it from him, right? They make this deal, and this handshake deal. And he's going to buy the WWE for him. And they also make a deal that they're going to have a wrestling match, and whoever loses the match is going to get their head shaved by the other one. So if Vince wins, he shaves Trump's head. This. And if Trump wins, he's going to shave Vince's head. And they have the wrestling match. And of course, Trump's wrestler wins, and he shaves Vince's head on national TV. And then he owns the wrestling show. And the storyline plays out over the next several episodes that Vince is kind of now suddenly this like sniveling, groveling wimp who has like the janitor's closet where Trump makes him work out of, and Trump's like running the show and kind of putting his name and his stamp on everything. And then get this, it gets even more sort of extreme. In actually the clip that where he makes the deal, Vince again is insulting his audience, right? These are people who go to wrestling shows. They're usually not educated. They're like kind of, you know, watching this drama play out. And Vince insults them, says these people are stupid. And Trump turns to the audience and is like, I think these people look pretty smart to me. And of course, everyone cheers. Like he's their hero in that stage. And so when Trump owns it, he actually, in the few episodes where he owns the WWE, he gives Vince's money away. He literally rains it from the ceiling in an episode with $100 bills and $50 bills raining down over the audience. It comes up on the Jumbotron. He's like, get this, Vince. And he drops Vince's money on the crowd, and they're grabbing it and cheering. Like Donald Trump gets to play the literal billionaire Robin Hood who goes in and takes money from your big bad boss and gives it to the working class who's watching you. So how does this resolve, right? The Trump character on the show is running the show. He's giving money away or whatever. And he gets kind of bored because he's like, you know, what else am I going to do? I've got better things to do than run a wrestling show. And so he decides he's going to sell it back to Vince. But of course, he sells it back at not just there's the scene where he is negotiating with him, and he ends up selling it back to him at twice the price that he bought it from. And then the Trump character walks off into the sunset as the Robin Hood who, like, you know, embarrassed and humiliated the other guy, walked away, gave the keys back to the world to Vince, but everyone in the audience kind of really knows who's boss now and really who can pull the strings here. And the equilibrium sort of, you know, got back to normal, but nobody forgot the lesson. Donald Trump played that character. And when you map that on, and what's important about that character in the Donald Trump story of 2016 is he gets to humiliate the other guy, right? He walks away at the end, but he gets to win and humiliate the other guy. And the sort of dichotomy of Trump versus Vince worked so well, I think, really for Hillary Clinton, for so many people who saw her as the avatar of the Vince McMahon type character, right? This kind of elitist, rich lady who kind of looks down on all of us, kind of. Yeah. But for me, I mean, and we could talk about why I think 2020 is different. But before I get there, the end of that storyline, the only thing that allows Donald Trump to walk away is that he shaved Vince McMahon's head, right? He humiliated the other guy, and he gets to walk away as the kind of winner in that scenario, even though he walks away. The moment I was as worried, I watched your previous shows with Mookie or whatever, I was as worried in your intro there as some other Americans that, this is going to be really tight until Trump got COVID. For me, Trump getting COVID doesn't fit that script at all. That is flat out humiliating for him. Like, that was not supposed to happen. His life is a fiction. His character is untouchable on that show, right? His character cannot be bothered on that show. In fact, this might feel like a little aside. There was another really crazy wrestler named Boogeyman who was this really insane, weird character who was always like slobbering and supposed to represent your nightmares. And there's this like scene that they filmed with Donald Trump where Boogeyman comes up behind him and is going to like scare him. But of course, Donald Trump, the character, is totally unfazed and is like, hey, I told you to get me a soda. And like the joke of that little scene is Boogeyman then like, just becomes a wrestler, be like, oh, okay, boss, and walks away. Like, the Donald Trump character cannot be humiliated, cannot be he can't be made to look the fool. He has to be the winner in the eyes of the crowd, the Coliseum, and then he could walk away. Him getting COVID was just not supposed to happen. That was the thing that he was untouchable and supposed to be flaunting and making fun of and telling everybody it's a hoax. And reality and science has this annoying way of not caring whether you think it's a hoax. And he fucking got it. And he's on oxygen in the hospital. That was the moment where I immediately, my blood pressure went down. I was like, oh, like, it's over. The game is fucking over. And frankly, listen, I don't know if it was a 1-to-1 match, but the polls just skyrocketing as soon as that happened to Biden. Mm-hmm. To me, felt like confirmation of like, yeah, this storyline is not sticking. Now, I don't know how it ends. He seems to be totally flailing, looking for how this storyline of the Donald Trump character can still walk away and give the keys back to Vince McMahon and still humiliate the other guy. I don't know. He's trying everything now, throwing Fauci under the bus, whatever else. But I don't think he can win. I just think like the game is over. And I shared this actually on my last podcast, but I just moved to North Carolina. So when I was driving south,
you're a swing state voter.
I made it by like 3 days with my registration. But on my drive down, passing Trump signs along the road, it was still when he was in the hospital, actually, when I drove down here. And not that it was the first time I had this emotion, but like my overarching emotion for the Trump signs I was seeing was really just kind of like, it was a little pathetic. I wasn't angry. I wasn't intimidated by it. I wasn't upset by it. I was upset for them that I feel like they got conned, but in a way I felt like he let them down. I was like, I'm sorry, your superhero just sold you out. Like, he was not supposed to get COVID. And
but Jay, yeah. So you've got all that, and I think that is totally accurate, and I think it's completely fascinating, the WWE thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that he was on a downward trajectory when you're talking about the polls and everything. Yeah, that was happening well before that. I mean, he came out and he thought that the violence and everything he was talking about in Kenosha and Portland and where George Floyd in Minnesota, he thought that all of those things were going to get people to his side if he started making himself the law and order guy. He's going to bring back law and order. Yeah. But the more he did that, after his visit to Kenosha, his poll lead, Biden's poll lead, actually expanded even more. So that's before he got COVID. So I've got like Spitz is here. We were talking about Spitz. Yeah. So he's talking here. So he thinks that Trump rocked his COVID response, and he came on here So he talked about how he's going to come out with this COVID thing and say, okay, now I know what you went through. Where Biden always had that, hey, I know what you went through. I've had these tragedies in my family. I've been knocked down so many times. I can help you. He had that whole empathy thing. So Spitz's point was now he can actually steal some of that empathy brand and say, hey, Biden never got COVID, but I've got it. I know what you felt like, and I beat it. I beat it.
Here's the thing. Go ahead.
Let me just say one more thing. So so when he does that, then there was a point where they were actually attacking Joe Biden for not getting COVID.
Yeah,
he's like, this guy doesn't know what you're going through because he's never gotten COVID. So you know how they spin these things, like 200,000 people died. Well, yeah, it was only 200,000. It would have been 2.2 million. So we actually saved 2 million lives because only 200,000 people died. And for his audience, that works. So
for his audience, exactly. Yeah. He's gonna get his 40%. Like, for his audience, he's just not gonna. Here's the thing with like the narrative thing. Donald Trump always had writers. He didn't write that character for himself. He didn't write that storyline on WWE. He didn't write his character on The Apprentice. He just played it. He's a really bad writer. This is really what I'm saying. I mean, I know narrative a little bit, and he's trying. And if I was really a Trump fan and trying to spin that for him, that might be the best I could do too, frankly. It just wasn't in the fucking script to get COVID. He might, if you think he rocked his response for his base, I don't doubt it. He gave them something to go with.
The Mussolini moment. The balcony, ripping off the mask, and
he tried. He reshot the thing, and he tried to make it look. He's fucking trying, but he's not a good writer. Like I just don't think that's flying for anybody who's. I mean, we could future cast this thing, but yeah, if Mookie's point is that, or like you said, for his base, great. Like they're never gonna leave him. But I do think there is a tiny bit of him. Here's the thing, and this is a point that you and I have made sort of privately a lot. That I think a lot of non-Americans make the mistake of thinking that the game is winning the middle and getting people to change sides. It's really not in this country. It's just getting people to show the fuck up to the polls, because our voting turnout numbers are pathetic. It's just turnout and it's just energy. I'm sure we could maybe talk about some of the polls, but the one that got a lot of attention and the one that honestly made me the most nervous in 2016 was that now famous LA Times poll, where they weren't just simply calling and asking you who are you going to vote for. It was like a gradient scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you going to vote for this candidate? And then how likely are you to vote at all? And Trump was getting 10 10s, right? It was like insanely enthusiastic people. And Hillary was getting like 7 7s and, even like 8 8s, whatever. And that was the poll that I was like, that's the one that scared me. Of the enthusiasm of the Trump voter was through the roof. Whether they would admit it to a pollster or not, I really think the Trump COVID thing, I think, is a big deal. Maybe just the general chaos, like you're saying. There's a lot of other factors that were happening before that. The enthusiasm, not necessarily for Trump this time, but the lack of anti-other person, that lack of a Vince McMahon that he's fighting right now, because it's Joe fucking Biden. Like, frankly, today, I'm sure you've seen it. He's saying like Joe Biden will believe the scientists. He's trying everything. Called him Sleepy Joe for a while. That's an airball, even in Trump world. Like, that's a bad wrestling character, Sleepy Biden. Yeah, Crooked Hillary is someone who's a good wrestling character. You could imagine him body slamming, and in the mind of the American psyche. And I'm not trying to downplay them. I'm saying the theater of the WWE is incredible. I mean, one of my favorite documentaries is called Wrestling with Shadows, about Bret Hart, and it's fantastic. If people haven't seen it, I mean, amazing filmmaking, and uses the theater of the WWE and the Bret Hart character. It's sort of a different storyline, to talk about serious issues and philosophy of politics. I mean, the characters that wrestle in that dumb thing that looks like men in spandex, because it is, represent archetypes of story. When we were Hulk Hogan, the great American hero or whatever, fighting the Shah of Iran when they had the Iron Sheik, who was actually played by a Puerto Rican guy. But it's like politics literally in the ring, and philosophies in the ring. Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, was a bad guy when we were growing up. Like, all of these character types. So that is where, and I forgot to I left something out in the middle of that Trump story. He was also at WrestleMania 20 when Jesse the Body Ventura was there and interviewed him on the sidelines during the show. I don't know if that's where he got the idea of like, oh wait, this is actually just politics here, but maybe that's where it was planted. But what's happening in that ring is archetypes and people's emotions. It might be very like base Roman Colosseum kind of theater, but if you think of it as sort of like, trailer park Shakespeare. It's amazing and beautiful. And again, I'm not trying to downplay it. And Crooked Hillary as a character is the character that represents the forgotten man being left behind by the march of globalization, your job being outsourced, immigrants coming in, this kind of scoffing crooked, making back deals when the cameras aren't rolling. Like, you wanted to see her, if you're that person who got hurt by that stuff, you want to see her get body slammed. But sleepy Joe Biden actually sounds like a relief right now to most people who are like, this is a little chaotic. And someone who listened to scientists, I don't care who you are, you can say you're not going to wear a mask. If your grandmother gets sick or someone you love gets sick or you start getting a little cough, there's something a little deeper. You drop the theater for a minute and you think about your survival first and foremost. I just think this pandemic is a beast that Trump needed to go away. He hoped it would when he said it was going to magically go away. It's something that he never was going to be able to beat because it's real. And the wrestling match is scripted. The Donald Trump character was always going to win because that was the script. But in reality, things happen, things change. I don't know what the analogy is, which is why I don't know what's going to happen. I'm pretty sure he's going to lose. I mean, I'm looking at the same polls as everyone else. We can talk about that. But I don't know what's going to happen when he loses because that's not what happens to Donald Trump, the character. He might just take his 40% and start his own AONN or whatever and split Fox News and split the Republican. I don't think he's going to stop having rallies even when he's not president. He's just going to live in that the rest of his life, which we could future forecast. But he's still looking for a way to write the ending, and he doesn't have good writers around him. It's got
So I think so what. Again, what Spitz was talking about, he's coming at this from a brand strategy perspective. And right. I've told him, this, and we've had like 3 episodes on this. And I've told him where I disagree with him. Mm-hmm. Right? I think that this brand strategy is he's totally on point. Right, he's on brand whenever he does these things, and he's the guy who doesn't believe in the mask. He's the guy who's not into the science. He's the guy who says, this is anti-establishment feel. We're against the establishment, we're against the elites, and the scientific community, scientific authorities are part of the establishment, as Fauci said, right? And they're part of it. So they're going at anti-science full on. It's unabashed. It's totally out in the open. And like you're saying, it's trying to throw the kitchen sink at everything now. The problem is, and this is also a question for Spitz that I'll talk to him about when he comes back, is that right now is the time for closing arguments. There's 2 weeks left. Okay, there was a poll recently that showed 56% of Americans said that they were better off now than they were 4 years ago. Okay, now that is something that they should be just running away with this, and every ad should be about that. They should have testimonials. They go, here's one of the 56%. Here's another guy of the 56%. Here's a senior. Here's a woman. That's what they should be doing. But right now, what he's focusing on, is still all of the Fox News stuff. He's focusing on Hunter Biden emails again, which was done. And, there's no Democrat now is falling for the whole emails thing, right? Like the butter email thing became such a big meme. So there's, and then now, you have the polls are different from what they were in 2016. 2016, by the way, they weren't as off as people think. Right? It was there was a small polling error that is actually and one thing about the polls, I'll let you finish. 2018 was one of the best, most accurate polling years of all time after they looked closer at these models, and they're still using those same models for now. So anyway. Well, I mean, you look at the results of all of the elections that happened in 2017, 2018, and 2019, right? And it's just completely, it's all pointing in one direction. So the thing is that the polls were just as accurate as they have ever been. It's just that the little polling error that happened, that usually happens, of 1 to 2% in certain swing states, just happened to align with the place where he got his margin of victory by that same narrow margin, right? They just came together. Now what they have is there's a big difference between, because people are talking about how now Trump is leading in Wisconsin by, I don't know, 7 or 8 points, Michigan by 7 or 8 points. Hillary Clinton was leading by around 12 points at this point in time in those swing states. But there were third party candidates, and she was leading in numbers that were less than 50%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Biden is above 50%. The undecided voters during Hillary's time, there was a huge number of undecided voters. There's virtually none now. Over 90% of people are already decided. So there's some basis in the data for the confidence that
yeah. Do you know the third party candidate right now? Like who it is? Like without looking it up, how many people can actually know her name?
Most people don't. I don't know who she is, but you're talking
Jo
about
Jorgensen.
Jo Jorgensen, yeah, from the Libertarian.
Yeah, that's it. But honestly, the Jill Stein factor was bigger than people think if you look really, really close into the details of it. I think, and
Gary Johnson,
Joe Rogan, Gary Johnson, yeah. And I know some Jo Jorgensen voters. I just want to throw Jo Jorgensen under the bus for a second if any libertarians are watching. But she was asked about what SCOTUS nominees that she would have if she happened to be president. Her two answers: Alan Dershowitz and Judge Napolitano, or whatever his name is on Fox News. So you could be a libertarian, but it doesn't give you carte blanche to be that stupid and oblivious about like federal government responsibilities. So let's just be thankful Jo Jorgensen won't be anywhere near the presidency. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking about polls and sort of like what it might look like again, like I'm looking at the same stuff you are. My last episode on Dilemma actually was sort of about the nightmare scenarios of election night. So I'm not saying this is going to be like a smooth ride suddenly because of COVID or the polls. We're still in for total madness. We're still in for election night being ugly and slanted and some sort of, ripping apart at the seams, maybe within Fox News itself, that half of it is saying that he won and half of it's not. He's going to want to close the polls that night. States are pulling all kinds of shenanigans of when they can start counting votes and stuff. But I'm a little hopeful right now that actually like it's overcomable or it's not overcomable by Trump, that it's going to be a pretty big slaughter
if you're looking at the polls as a way to track whether your strategy is working, then just based on that, and again, if you think the polls are inaccurate, I don't think that they're predictive even now. I mean, they're not necessarily predictive of what's going to happen on the election. But if you're looking at as a way to see whether the strategy that Trump has is working at this point, then it's pretty clear that it's not. So there's a couple of things here. One from Mars, but I'll bring up this thing that Spitz said. I have something to say about that.
Gotta get Spitz on, just me and Spitz, yeah.
Yeah. This is it. No, there's a bunch of people watching, but Spitz is. I actually wish that he was on this. We'd have one with all three of us. That'd be kind of fun. But he's saying, what about the new GOP registered voters? And he's right. Like the GOP new voters in the GOP, that they've been trying to get them to register in some of these battleground states. I think three of them, Florida and Pennsylvania and one other state, I can't remember. They found that they were better than expected, the new registrations. And the thing is, they're still not as much as Democrats, Spitz. And the other thing is, they're more than overcome by these demographics that Trump absolutely needs to win. Yeah. Number one, seniors. Like for the first time in I don't know how many election cycles, right? Seniors are going Democrat. Yeah. That hasn't happened. So
when you're telling seniors not to, or you're telling America like don't let COVID dominate your life, and you're 70 years old and you're afraid, this is not a winning strategy if you're trying to win seniors, which is a huge, huge deal. Yeah.
Yeah. And seniors personally know other seniors who've died. Number one, they're more vulnerable. Yeah. And the other thing is like they vote. They come out and they actually vote.
Yeah. I'll just say on sort of like that question and other ones, and like this is no disparaging of Spitz or anyone like that. Like I'm not a pollster.
Oh, we all love Spitz.
I'm just saying like I'm not a pollster. I'm not like a data scientist. I know some. But I'm not going to pretend that I know more than like Nate Silver about this stuff, like on your podcast. It's almost like I'm a huge baseball fan, and like I can look at YouTube video of like a baseball prospect and like analyze his swing sitting on my chair here. The truth is, like, there's professionals who've been watching this kid for like a year, and I'm going to read their write-up, and they probably are going to make a better prediction about like, how good of a baseball player this guy is than me. They might be wrong. Everybody's wrong. But I'm going to like, what else can we do? I'm going to sit here and defer to like the data scientists and the data that I can see and analyze it from that. So if Mookie wants to make a lot of money, you could bet on Trump right now on a whole lot of sites and go for it. He could put his money where his mouth is. I'm curious what odds he would take on. But the problem is obviously like the nightmare that we're talking about is not necessarily who gets the most votes. It's how we're going to count them, when we're going to count them. Is it going to be 2 weeks of Trump claiming he won, waiting for us to just count the goddamn mail-in votes where it's obvious that Biden will win? I mean, that's the real nightmare, is not knowing who won the presidency. But if we counted all of the votes, I'd be, I don't know. I haven't checked sort of like predicted or those sites in a while what Trump is at right now. I'm sure you could buy shares pretty cheaply.
Yeah, he's up by about 10 points, but and nationally, which corresponds to an electoral college victory. But so I want to say the first part of the title of this show is why Trump won. Okay, so
Right.
You talked about the WWE thing,
yeah.
but I want to say, like, there are a whole bunch of reasons. Everybody's talked about it. I think there are two main things. Right, two main things.
Mhm.
Number one is the opposition candidate, Hillary Clinton. Yes. Everybody was kind of meh about her. Like they were very lukewarm, if anything,
or angry.
Yeah,
on the other side, just furious that she was the candidate. Yeah.
Yeah, they were, and even the Democrats, they didn't really like her that much. That, in combination with the fact that everybody thought she was a shoo-in.
Mm-hmm.
They thought, well, we've elected a black president twice. We're all sitting here talking about transgender pronouns. We're vegans, and we're moving on. Like, this is a totally different world. How are these Tea Party people going to come in? It's not going to happen. So they stayed home. As a result, and you talked about this, turnout. As a result, I think it was Chris Cuomo said that black people helped elect Donald Trump by staying at home in 2016. Right? The people just did not come out. And I've said this before here. Donald Trump, when he won in 2016, he got fewer votes than Dukakis did in 1988.
Yeah,
he got fewer votes than Mitt Romney did in 2012. So in terms of turnout, it was a very low turnout election. And
everyone was disgusted, which we should mention was the Russian playbook, really, was to suppress the vote. Even more so, we could talk about Trump's strategy, and we could always argue about how much of Russia had an influence, but that was their game plan, is to make everybody so disgusted of just the politics of both sides that you stay home. But they knew the Trump voters were energized enough to show up and pull the lever. I don't think that's going to happen this time.
Yeah, well, one thing about Russia is it's really interesting the way they do it, because we're talking about collusion and whether it happened or not. The way that Russia does it, and this is I was watching an interview with some of these people who are monitoring all of the activity from Russia, is the way they use social media is they don't really come up with anything new.
No, amplify it.
Yeah, they find something that Trump tweets, right, about the Hunter Biden Ukraine thing, or something about COVID being a hoax, and then they will take that stuff that he said himself and they will amplify it, and they will go ahead and make dozens of news stories about it and disseminate it on social media, and of course people will believe it, and we've seen it. So it's actually a lot more insidious and less obvious than people think it is, and it's hard to put your finger on. It's hard to say that are you going to trace it to Russia? Are you going to trace it to Trump's tweet? I mean, all of it works together. So that's also, that's something that's actually happening right now as well. So
yeah, and the Hunter Biden thing is, I don't need to get into the details of who in particular is falling for such an obvious piece, but once it's out there, it's just so obvious. But once it's out there, it's in the water, and this is how they do it. And they mix it. This is what disinformation is. I'll give you actually like a personal sort of anecdote, because I think it's so cool. I was in Kiev for a film screening, and I got invited to check out this really cool group, this studio called stopfake.org. They still operate. And they're pretty like badass filmmaker, tech nerd kids who are working out of like a basement in a university in Kiev, purely working on fighting back on Russian disinformation, mostly in Eastern Europe. And then they just launched like an American sort of operation as well. And I spent like the day with them and saw what they were doing, and it was so cool. But you also then realize just how difficult this stuff is to fight against, and how just crazy effective it is. In mostly Eastern Europe is where they were. In Ukraine itself, they were having trouble with it. But that is the game plan, is to basically sow chaos and keep us at each other's throats, because it makes us weaker. And the other thing about Russian interference is we talk about elections and who they want to elect and who they want to sort of be favorable to them. It doesn't stop there. This isn't like an election hack. It's just a constant disinformation, weakening of the unity of a country because it just makes you vulnerable to all kinds of things. They would love to see us knocked down from our perch, which obviously has happened. So, and they mix it with real things. The Hunter Biden thing is a perfect example because, and talk about insidious. I mean, if this really, it seems so obvious what they've done, but you're talking about a physical object now. You're talking about a laptop that was with a doctored hard drive, very clearly at this point, seemingly mixed in with some real emails. It's pretty easy to do this. The metadata is pretty obvious about what happened. You mix in the real emails, which are, Hunter Biden, kind of a shithead who was like,
say what happened with the metadata, because I don't think a lot of people know.
Yeah, it was there were 3 emails that sort of implicated Joe as like the big guy getting his money or something, and then like this meeting that was supposed to happen. And the metadata with them showed that they were created on like the same day that the 2 fucking Ukrainian guys that were working with Giuliani got arrested. And it's like, it just didn't match anything else in the hard drive really. But that being said, they don't even really care in Russia because the rest of that hard drive is full of, Hunter Biden, who was dealing with drugs and all kinds of personal problems, I'm sure. And let's be honest, probably using his last name to his advantage, because what else are you going to do when you have the last name Biden and you have a drug problem and you need money? Of course, you're going to use the name. So this isn't like pretty stuff that he did working with Burisma and all this. And he's talked about that too. But then you get in the situation then when you have someone we won't name who's spreading this stuff online right now. It's not just right wingers. You have them saying like, are the emails real? And then you get something like, you have to say like, well, which ones? Which is a shitty answer. And you're immediately like, Russia wins no matter what. Because you're immediately like, well, yeah, some of them, but not the worst ones. And then immediately it just like sounds like you're defensive. It's so when Joe Biden says it was a smear campaign, it literally is a smear campaign. But calling it that, unfortunately, doesn't like diffuse the bomb. Credit to crazily enough, Fox News apparently turned down the story because they knew it was such a ridiculous piece of information they were getting. Fox News refused to run that. That just today was released that they passed on the story. Their bar is here. The New York Post is just a little bit lower, apparently. But it's like it was. But once it's out there in the New York Post, which again to non-Americans sounds like this reputable paper, been around for like 200 years. But if you're a New Yorker, like I used to be, like that's literally the piece of paper that like pigeons are taking shits on in the subway, and it's like joke puns on the back page. This is not like a legitimate outlet. But once it's out into the water,
it's not normally a time I'd say full disclosure here, but yeah, I've written for the New York Post, so
well,
I probably shouldn't have claimed that right now while you were talking about pigeons.
No, but perfect example, because even these outlets have plenty of good journalism. I was just talking with a friend. We were talking about RT, right? RT in Russia. Actually, as another personal anecdote, because I'm talking about sort of my narrative filmmaker life.
Russia,
I don't necessarily. Yeah, right. I don't necessarily. I'm trying to give a lot of leeway to people who are falling for this stuff, especially non-Americans. I was editing a film about law. It's called All Rise, about this thing called the Jessup Cup, about international law. And for my opening sequence, I just needed a whole bunch of news shots, like basically chaotic shots of news reports showing a world in crisis or something like that. And I remember, in a rough cut that I was showing internally, I had a bunch of these, like flashes on the screen, all these like news things. And one of them was RT, and someone it was a law firm that I was working with that watched it. They were like, oh, I think that's like a Russian propaganda outlet. This was like 6 years ago. And I had no idea. I was like, oh, I just like took it off YouTube. I was like, should I change it? And I ended up actually keeping it because I thought like, that's cool that it's like weird propaganda mixed in with other stuff in this opening sequence I was doing. But like, I'm a pretty informed guy. I keep up with the news and whatever. Like I had no idea what the hell RT was, but someone at Stop Fake in the Ukraine would be like, dude, that's Russian propaganda. And so me trying to tell people like, hey guys, like Rudy Giuliani and the New York Post, and like everybody involved in that story, it was like a Hannity producer. Like you go through the list of who put that story out and you're like, guys, like, come on, this is a propaganda piece. They just literally, in the non sort of derogatory sense of the word, were probably just ignorant to sniffing that out. But there you go. Like once it's in the water and in the ecosystem, it makes an imprint. And there's a whole, talking about my podcast and philosophy and moral philosophy. I don't know what social media companies should do in that situation. I really have no idea. And this probably didn't happen directly, but if you're Twitter, if you're Jack Dorsey or whatever, and you're sitting there and you see on your site that is obviously influential, a story going everywhere, everyone's sharing it, let's just say, again, this didn't happen. Let's just say the FBI calls you and it's like, hey, Jack, that story that's going everywhere on your site, like we're investigating it. There's like a really good chance that it was planted literally by an enemy of the country to do exactly this. What do you do when you're Jack? Because what they did, as we all know, is to make it impossible and, again, out of bounds on their website to share it. It gave you some error message apparently or something. I didn't try to do it, to share it and to spread it. Backfired. Now there's a lot of data that literally the banning of it made it like 2 times more popular or something. And now, of course, it feeds the conspiracy theory of like, you get that effect of like, ooh, what are they hiding? What don't they want me to see? And then the counter of that of doing nothing and just unfettered, like let it go, also seems like, well, you're going to do harm. And at that point, you're just trying to, I don't know, mitigate harm. You slap a warning on it or something. It's like, it was just putting up this quandary of like in 2016, social media got slammed for not policing fake news by just about everybody. And then in 2020, now they're getting slammed for policing fake news by just about everybody. And I don't know. And frankly, I think it's just a really hard problem. I agree there's a way out of it, which is like find your moral philosophy, find your policy, be consistent, and try to apply it as consistently as possible and be open. It's the best you can do. But frankly, these are like not easy problems. And the stuff coming down the pipeline of deep fakes and even more insidious kind of fake news it's just going to get worse. Well, but luckily, I think none of this is going to make Trump win, but it certainly does not help the landscape.
The thing is that fake news is in the eye of the beholder, right? It really depends on who thinks it is. If your brand, if Trump's brand is essentially that everybody is lying to you. Mm-hmm. Right? Everybody's lying. Don't believe anybody. I'm the only one who's going to tell you the truth, and I'm the only one who's going to protect you from all the lies and the rigging that everybody else is doing around you. And then you have Twitter trying to push down a story that is favorable to him. Then it just plays into that. Mm-hmm. That actually that can benefit him. The only thing is that it's not. It's only benefiting. Whatever he's doing right now is targeted to his base. There's nothing that he's done right now. There's nothing. And when Spitz says that this works, this is working, that's working. First of all, like, how do we know this is working? How are we tracking it? And the second thing is it working beyond that? Right now, all of the data shows that it's not really going outside the people who are going to vote for him anyway. And I have a lot of people that you're saying are promoting this. The unnamed people I think that a lot of them had those sympathies, ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Right? Or just tunnel vision on other problems. Yeah.
Right. And then, now that, this is happening and this story comes out, it's a way for them to find an excuse to say, okay, yeah, we were right all along. We had these sympathies. So
I think there's, sorry to interrupt. I think there's 2 things. There's like 2 kinds of people in this world right now. And it's people who, I would say objectively just see the truth, but think that Donald Trump is a unique, immediate danger that needs to just be unplugged as fast as possible before we get to any other kind of problem. Or people who don't think that way, people who think that he's somehow, a lesser of 2 evils equivalents, or it's not so bad, or he doesn't really shake things up that much. And internationally, I think there's people who think either a strong America, a united America is an important thing for something like, let's talk about Hunter Biden and his relationships with China, whatever. If you think you need America to be a strong player on the world stage in order to do something about something like the Uyghur genocide, then if you're sitting here in America, you think, well, then the first order of business is getting rid of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Like but if you don't agree with that, then fine. I can make some argument about like, no, you Hunter Biden somehow compromises this whole thing. The strategy there, if I'm going to put my Mookie hat on, I don't think is to win over any voters to get them to vote for Trump. It's to just try to dampen the support, get Biden voters to stay home being like, man, like another corrupt politician. I guess I'll just skip election day. It might work for some people, but the 2 kind of people that I laid out in the world, I just think there's enough of them who've been like, no, like I do not care what is running against them. Even here in North Carolina, I'm getting more familiar with the races here. Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham are the two. Tom Tillis is sort of, a Trump Republican sympathizer.
Cal Cunningham is the guy who had the scandal recently.
There you go. A sexing scandal. You know what? No one cares. They're like, no one cares right now. It's like, take care of the emergency, get him out of office, and let's do this thing. And then I want to say, just to back up again, to zoom out of the nitty gritty of like the details of the day-to-day news stuff. I think back to like the Trump WWE and sort of where I like to analyze things. I think there's another thing just happening in our era and in our world where the role of something like a president, I feel like, has changed a bit for people, where it's less to do with policy, really, honestly, and less to do with day-to-day, like how your life operates. Frankly, like we're talking about Twitter banning a story, like what Jack does with his platform probably affects like my life more, or like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or whatever. Whatever they decide to do probably affects me way more than what Donald Trump is going to try to do. That might be a place of privilege. I'm sure he's affecting a lot of people in different ways. But I think in large part, our presidents have become, and this is not new, but it's accelerated, have become characters and have become what we want them to be, is some sort of custodians of our own ethos and our story of what we want the nation to be, a face, an advertising thing, a brand, as Mookie's saying. And that's what we want them to do and to be. And so getting involved, it's why you're not hearing any policy. Like I don't even know what the top 3 policy issues are for voters right now. I don't even think they could say, and I don't even think they frankly care. It's just a character that they're voting for, and the Trump character and the brand is what it is, and it's triggered enough people to come out and say, like, this character doesn't represent me anymore. There's some speculation, to zoom back in, that women in the suburbs are starting to turn on him because they're like, a lot of them are mothers, and they're like, he is exactly what I want my son not to be when he grows up, and I just can't pull the lever. Yeah,
there's aside from seniors, one of the biggest groups that he is there's been a massive net drop in support.
But the cause for it, I mean, why are they leaving? The white women in the suburbs, especially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the cause of that speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speculating, like, is it some of that just being like, I don't want my kid to be a bully, and I'm tired of this. Maybe they're seeing their kids kind of do that. And again, the Hillary factor is the story of 2016, and frankly, a very like a weak field of Republicans who were up against Trump. But the Hillary factor, when she was chirping a little bit on Twitter in the last couple of months, it was like, please just shut up. I'm sorry, Hillary. Like, you've been dealt a really tough deck of cards in the world, but like, please just stay quiet for 3 months, be as boring as possible. And then we could talk about it. Like, do not write a book. Do not talk about anything. Like, just please stay quiet. I can't even imagine. So here's the thing with the wrestling analogy: wearing Hillary for jail 2016 or whatever shirt is a wrestling shirt, right? Like that's the theater of wrestling. And like Obama with like, prison stripes or something, or even worse, you can easily picture a Trump voter wearing that. Is there a shirt that they're wearing that says like Biden for jail? Like I can't even picture it, actually, because it's so badly cast.
No, well, they want to lock up Gretchen Wilmer. I mean, that's where the locker up is going on. Like,
so yeah, and Kamala kind of fits, but yeah.
You know what they're doing is that I think this may be one of the reasons he's losing. We were talking about policy. You haven't heard them talk about policy. It's in Trump's favor right now to talk about policy. Like, he can talk about the economy. There are certain things that he can discuss. And he can make it, because it's the whole idea that the Republicans right now want this election to be a choice between two candidates. The Democrats want this to be a referendum on one candidate, right? And this is it seems like his own strategists are very, very frustrated, his own aides and advisors, about the fact that the Democrats want to make this a referendum, and he is doing that for them. Yeah. He's actually making it he's not making it about policies. He's making it about, this person's correct. He's making it about characters, right? I am this character, the other person is this character. Which one do you want? And people saying, well, I want the other guy. And he's like, I don't know why they don't want me. And he's turning this into a referendum instead of making it about policy, or talking about 56% of people are better off than they were 4 years ago. And Why are they better off? Mainly for economic reasons, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if my connection is going in and out.
No,
if
I've
anybody's
got you.
noticing any differences, but yeah,
I've got you. Well, and frankly, I mean, that first debate, which was just seemingly a disaster for Donald Trump, I think he did the biggest favor. It was clear to me that and this has been the case for a long time, he wants so badly to be running against the squad, to be running against AOC and Ilhan Omar and Tlaib and the radical left.
That's not sticking either. Yeah.
Well, because Joe Biden isn't those people. Like the best part of that first debate was Joe Biden. Every time, I think it happened twice, where Trump said something kind of crazy about looting or something, or like their protesters are like violent, and Joe would say something, and Trump was like, "Really? You just lost the radical left?" And Biden's just like shrugs. He's like, "Yeah, like dude." When he's like the Green New Deal and like AOC's thing, he's like, "I'm not AOC. Like I am the Democratic Party right now." I thought Biden was brilliant and just doing so to your point of, I think people are genuinely afraid of like the radical left. If he was running against AOC, Bernie's a different character, let's leave him out of it, but if AOC was up there, I think Trump, this would be a bloodbath. This really would be a choice between two philosophies for the country, and it would be kind of the another one of our favorite mutuals, woke versus America or something like that she wanted to pitch this as. It would be something like that. Joe Biden is doing, if you're worried about woke people, and I'm one of them, like, I talk about it plenty of like the excesses of the left. I made a film about the regressive left, et cetera. Joe Biden, exactly. Joe Biden is doing exactly what you would want him to do mostly. He's not perfect. We could talk about some of the things. I know the transgender question. We could talk about a few other things, but he's doing just about as well as you could expect him to do to not be woke. He's literally getting up and saying looting and, robbing stores or whatever in the middle of a protest is not a peaceful protest, and he doesn't support it. He's telling you that he's not supporting the Green New Deal. He's not trying to overturn the thing. In fact, on his boring town hall, which I thought was great because it was boring, someone asked him about Trump's foreign policy and if he should get some credit for some things happening in the world. Like the Israel thing. And Biden even was like, yeah, sure, some of it. But then he just zoomed out to being like, yeah, he's really damaged our character in the entire world. Biden is not being the like, fuck Donald Trump character. He is not being Ilhan Omar. He is not being Tlaib, because he's not those people. He's never been those people. This is just Trump's worst enemy. So if something went wrong strategy-wise, if Mookie was the brand strategist for Trump, and I'm sure he would have done a better job, because the problem has been Trump has been preparing seemingly to fight against the boogeyman of the left, which is not the guy standing next to him. He's wrestling. He's trying to wrestle the, like, imagine a wrestling character, like, woke AOC who wears all green and a Green New Deal and comes out with like, Bob Dylan music or something. Imagine that wrestling character. Don't put it to body slam that character on behalf of the forgotten man in America who doesn't care about that shit and just wants a strong leader. But Joe Biden came walking out of the wrestling thing being like, where am I? I don't even know what wrestling is. Like, it just doesn't work. Trump doesn't know how to fight that character. He doesn't know how to body slam that character. He got more and more frustrated. I think him not doing the second debate is because he doesn't know how to fight that character. Beyond the COVID thing, it's just like, in some ways, and I'll admit, I was skeptical of Joe. I thought, I don't know if Joe should be the guy running here. I think he's turned out to be the perfect antidote, which is old, boring, as long as he stays alive, because he is getting old.
That's a point where, I mean, Spitz also said, we talked about how should Joe Biden do his branding.
If he gets COVID in the next 3 weeks, then we should do an emergency broadcast of this episode.
Yeah. Okay. Fingers crossed. Like, just but I mean, that's the thing with Biden. One thing about Biden, the reason that I always supported him right from the beginning, right? And I always thought that he'd be the best candidate, is just looking at these demographics. Biden was very, very in tune with the Black community. Right. So if you notice, like, that the entire primary process turned around. You had Iowa and New Hampshire, mostly white states. You had Buttigieg and Bernie, and these guys were taking it away. And then South Carolina came, right? And he basically took South Carolina, which had massive, African American population there. And so he's been in touch with people saying, well, it's because he was Barack Obama's vice president. That's not really true. He's been in the Rust Belt. He's gone to their churches for like 40 years. He's been really, really, embraced by this community for a very long time, and they see him as someone who supports their cause.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the woke thing, a lot of times, you see the woke protesters who are like harassing that woman in the restaurant in that video. They're all white. You see the looting people, especially nowadays, they're pretty much all white. Everybody from Killer Mike to George Floyd's family to Obama, everybody's come out and condemned the looting and the violence, right? Including the families of these victims. So and he recognizes that difference. So he knows that defunding the police is very unpopular among African Americans. Right? He knows that these things like all the other stuff that you're talking about, the looting and the violence, he knows that he can speak up against that, and there are a lot of people who will agree with him in that specific demographic.
Yeah, and those younger people don't vote anyway.
Yeah, the younger people don't vote anyway.
Yeah, he knows like those people are unlikely to show up at the polls anyway. I mean, I think there is a pretty big Barack Obama effect with Biden that he's still getting.
There is. Yeah,
I wish I had it. I mean, when I got here to North Carolina, like in my mailbox, there was a big, like vote campaign thing with literally a giant picture of Barack Obama. It was a Biden-Harris thing. Biden and Harris, there was no pictures of them. It was a giant picture of Barack Obama. It looked like it was like a piece of mail from him. I think it's still a pretty big factor down here, but use it. I mean, hey, why not? Use whatever you have with it. But yes, I think I mean, Joe Biden has been around. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Biden is the Scranton guy. He's been going to Phillies games. He's always been just sort of, again, just as a character type, he's not an evil wrestler. And he's not even craven. Like, frankly, Kamala Harris worried me when he selected her. It's easy to imagine a Kamala Harris, an anti-Kamala Harris shirt being worn at a Trump rally. She plays a character that I think is a little bit, people can smell kind of the disingenuous on it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my favorite pick.
Snoop, I think that was the thing, right? When she was listening to Snoop in college. And
and his music wasn't even out. Yeah, and stuff. It felt like just like the hot sauce in my bag moment from Hillary Clinton and stuff. And Kamala's not my favorite person out there, but it seems like it's, they're also keeping that as quiet as possible. But I think, Joe Biden just doesn't play the villain for Donald Trump, and he can't land a punch on it. So I just don't see him. So all he can do is go to his base and rally things, and all Russia can do is to try to dampen the support of the turnout, to try to be like, well, they're all just corrupt politicians. I just think it's a losing cause at this point, and I'm not. I'm living easy right now. I don't know.
No, I'm kind of with you. And we'll catch up with Spitz too later on to see where he's at. I think that's going to inject some more excitement into this. I want to bring up a question that Mars had. Well, a comment that he actually had. I'm trying to find it. Just give me a second. Oh, there he is. So, and I wanted to ask you about this, like what you thought about this. Like, he's talking about Trump holding events, right? So with the crowds,
COVID stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so so he's holding the events with those crowds, and that is insane in the sense that yes, they're super spreader events, but a big part of the show, right? The show that he's winning, the Vince McMahon's money raining down on the crowd, the big tall buildings, the Trump Tower.
Dude, it's a great episode. You got to watch it. People are grabbing the money, cheering, and it's amazing. Donald Trump and it was Vince's money. That's the greatest part of it. It was like he was the Robin Hood. Anyway. Yeah.
So what we've seen here is that in the primaries, and Biden, it was Bernie who had the huge crowds. He had the rallies, right? Yeah. And he on Twitter he was huge. He was massive, and everybody hated Biden online. Ultimately, Biden beat Bernie in ways that Hillary never could. I mean, he beat in Michigan. He won every single district, every single county, right? Every single one. He beat Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts without even having been there. It was crazy, the scale of the Biden win in the primaries. Now you have this situation where you're saying, you see Trump signs all over the place, yard signs. You see Trump yard signs everywhere. You see these huge crowds at his rallies, as you did in 2016. And the only thing is, when you look at the polling, there's a 10-point Biden lead. So I think Nate Silver made the point that, well, is there a silent majority that's actually for Biden? Because it doesn't show up in the polls. It doesn't show up in yard signs. They don't show up at these sort of super spreader rallies. But every battleground poll, everywhere you look, Like it's just these people are his support just isn't wavering. Every single day of polling in the last year has shown him with a pretty stable, consistent lead.
I'm going to be really interested in when all the data comes out of how many first-time voters show up who aren't young people. Those are always there, but first-time voters in their 30s and 40s who vote for the first time, and it's for Biden. And it's, again, I don't think it's a silent majority for Biden. I think it's a silent, exhausted majority who's, I mean, you're in Canada. I know you have a ton of American relatives. It's been fucking exhausting here. And like not just with the news, just like interpersonally exhausting. All of us have gotten in fights with loved ones and friends over this stupid fucking, like, everything has become political, everything. And the fact, the fact that he's made the mask political to such a granular point that, again, I just moved here, so I've done a lot of trips to hardware stores, right? I'm getting furniture and stuff, knowing that when I walk into a Home Depot, I am likely to see at least 4 or 5 people here in North Carolina without masks because it's Home Depot versus Lowe's, where I'm likely to not, is a fucking exhausting thought that we have, that you could run the science experiment over and over again here, and it's just exhausting. And I think the silent majority is people who are just anti-chaos votes. And Trump is the chaos candidate, and Biden, like, the line that should be the line of, when historians write the history of this time, they're like, would you just shut up, man?
That was,
Biden, is the line of, like, so many of us of being like, just please shut up. Because, like, not even everything you're feeling or saying or your supporters, it's not even illegitimate. We have to have serious conversations about globalization and automation and demographic change. And, like, I'm not dismissing even the impulse to vote for Trump, but this is just chaos. That you could say that the polls of people saying their life is better now than 5 years ago or whatever. I think some of that is explained by how much of that do they give credit to Trump? I don't think very much. Frankly, how much are they going to give credit to that to Biden? I also think it's just less than it used to be. The president doesn't do as much on the ground for people. I think people are sort of wise to that. It's just like, dude, just stop with the chaos, because I'm going to manage my life, whether you're in the office or not. And, just I can't keep going with this kind of insanity.
Jordan Klepper from The Daily Show, he did his latest thing where he goes into Trump rallies and he interviews people. Mm-hmm. He asked this guy, he's like, so what? He's like, hey, listen, I've been doing great. My business has been doing amazing. Since Trump became president, I've been, profits, everything's been fantastic. He's like, oh yeah, what do you do? He's like, oh, I work for a debt relief agency or a debt collection agency or something like that. Great, and I was thinking, of course you're doing well. But it is true. There's probably a lot of people doing well, but you're right. I think it's relief versus revolution. I mean, people just want relief. They want the boring. I mean, Biden, I was actually shocked by this. Okay. And I know Biden has a lot of support, but those dueling town halls that they had.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Like the fact that Biden had 2.3 million more viewers than Trump did.
I'm very surprised by it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually shocking to me, and I think that probably tells me a lot more than the polls. In a big sense, because I watched the Tron, just wanted to see the train wreck, and I'm also Canadian, so I'm not as exhausted. I guess for us, we can still have our popcorn, and what's happening, what's crazy meth lab that's happening south of the border. But the other thing I want to tell you is, like, my niece, what you're saying about it being exhausting. My niece is 14, and she's from about half my family lives in the U.S. and she is American. She's born in Houston, raised in Houston. And she is in Canada right now. She decided, because they're doing online school anyway, because the school that she was going to, she would post something on TikTok. Like, she would say something like, just one specific example she gave me is, racism is not an opinion, right? And people just jumped on it. They're like, how do you know? We have to talk about it. This is something that can be debatable. And just stuff like that just happening on a daily basis to her. And she was just confused about it. And she came and she's like, I just want to be in a place where there are different kinds of people. Right. And I had to So she was talking about white people. She's like, "There's too many white people." I had to tell her. I was like, "Listen, it's not white people there. It's white people in Chicago are going to be very different from white people in Texas. It's not just the world that you're seeing around you." But people went through that. Like people of who are visible minorities like myself. I mean, we've seen that kind of stuff, that kind of bullying that comes down to racial characteristics, and they'll kind of try to get you on things that you can't change about yourself. But it never came with presidential endorsement.
Right.
Yeah. That's what really changes things. Like this racism is a debatable topic now. Now we can actually have a conversation about it where there are two sides, because
I mean, to jump in, I think like the way it's hitched itself, again, like on a granular level. If I see a Black Lives Matter poster on a storefront on a window around here, I was at a like outdoor goods store the other day, and there was a which could go either way, right? Politically, you could be like, oh, it could be Republican, could be Democrat, but I saw a Black Lives Matter thing outside. I saw that, and I knew everybody inside would be wearing masks, and they were. The fact that those two things are correlated to like a 100%, in my mind right now is the kind of exhausting thing that maybe is the kind of thing that your niece is expressing, where just like everything has become a political battle line that is expressed as a culture war. It's not expressed that, no one's having serious conversations about all of these topics. It's literally just a kind of like coming apart of demographics of who you are and what side of some sort of cosmic sort of philosophy that you're on. But yeah, the desire to just turn it off and hit pause and lower the volume on it, I think, is why Biden will ultimately win. Because there's certainly people, to Mars's question, who want the chaos and love the noise and love the fight. There's always going to be, on both sides, of course, but there's going to be Trump rallies. There's going to be Trump rallies after he loses. Like 3 years from now, there will be Trump rallies. What to that question, because I want to like future forecast a little bit, because I don't know if this place is going to get much better, America, even after this. Like, we need to get Trump out, but I think he's ruined the Republican Party. All of those old quotes from Lindsey Graham and whatever of like, if we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed and we will deserve it. I think it's going to be prophetic. They got their front ride for 4 years, and maybe they got their Supreme Court justice, and maybe that's like the deal they'll make in their heads, that it was worth it somehow. They'll do whatever post hoc rationalization, but they made their deal with the devil, and they're screwed. Because can you imagine this what Mars is asking about, in this crowd wearing their MAGA hats and getting deep into this thing and putting flags on their pickup trucks? Just picture it for a second, 4 years from now, and change the name from Trump to like John Kasich or Marco Rubio. How wrong does that feel? Jeb Bush, like, put whatever you want on there. It doesn't work. These motorcycle riders who found something in the Trump wrestling character that felt like their avatar, that's not going to come back with a Lindsey, even a Lindsey Graham or like a Ben Sass. Forget about it. It's not. And I think Trump will be resentful of it and continue to keep that 30% either at home or at his rallies and not voting for this. I think the pendulum swing is rather extreme in the other way. And I don't think this is a good thing, because I think eventually this is going to lead to the excesses of the left. Right?
Sounds pretty dystopian, yeah. But I actually have a different view of that. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think that the Biden win is a little more symptomatic of the fact that the way the extreme right has taken over and completely overrun the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's completely taken over the White House. You got a Supreme Court justice is going to be essentially far right. It's very.
Put a pin in that one, but we'll talk about Amy Coney Barrett if you want. But yeah, put a pin in. Yeah,
we'll put a pin in that. But the extreme left, the far left, hasn't overrun the mainstream liberals
not yet.
Way that
no.
Well, not yet. I don't think it's. I think that one of the reasons that rise, and so I've talked about wokeness being kind of like Sharia law, right? Where Sharia law is toxic, it's disgusting, it's absolutely like the worst thing you want. It's just anti-critical thinking, it's anti-science, anti-everything. but it becomes magnified, right, when there is an extreme that is legitimizing it. So, the extremes legitimize extremes. I think one of the reasons that you have the rise of the woke, and they're talking about all of these things, and they're doing it purely emotionally, purely a reactionary way, right? There's no debate or conversation, is because they're fighting against a force that is like that. And even mainstream liberals tend to get taken in by that, right? They're like, okay, this is how we have to do it. Everybody's just angry, like the temperature's just high all the time, right? But when you have somebody like, you said, what Spitz calls him Uncle Joe, and you're talking about, Sleepy Joe and boring, town halls and getting loads and loads of ratings. You had the Harper's letter, you had the Bernie defeat. Worldwide, you had Jeremy Corbyn, also hugely popular on Twitter. You thought that Labour was going to win, the worst defeat since the 1930s in the UK. All of this, the rise of this sort of woke left that was happening around the time of the 2017 when Corbyn came to power and Bernie really rose up. And by the way, I actually love Bernie. I'm just using him as an example of because he's associated with a lot of this kind of woke movement. I think that once there's some sense of normalcy, and once you have boring Joe Biden there, how Trump had trouble going up against him in the debate. I think the woke are going to have some trouble going up against him too, because all your liberals who right now are kind of there's a big sort of the middle of the Venn diagram is massive. The overlap is massive between the woke and the liberals because of the how they're united against Trump, right? Once you remove Trump, and now that one of those circles actually goes into power, then the distinction becomes a lot more.
Yeah, I follow you. I agree with all that analysis. The only part is like the remove Trump. Yeah, he'll be out of the office, but I think what he's going to do. My question is for you: is when the Republicans want to win again, what are they going to do? I mean, I think they're going to get crushed so badly this time. You could do it again. You could run it back and do a Donald Trump Jr. on the main ticket and find some like Christian. Like, it's brilliant what they've done to do like Mike Pence and Trump. It's like they got everybody that they needed in two people. You could try to match it up again with like a Matt Gaetz or something, or Donald Trump Jr. as like the second, and find some Christian conservative to pair with them and try to run it back. But I think this defeat is going to be so ugly that what are the Republicans going to do in order to try to win again? It's not going to be, they're not going to get these people who are waving Trump flags to get all up in arms and do the same kind of thing and hold these kind of insane rallies for John Kasich.
I had a conversation, a really eye-opening conversation with Andrew Seidel. He's he's a constitutional attorney, and he works with the Freedom from Religion Foundation as well. So we were talking about, and he was saying the conservatism as we know it right now, the current conservatism, republicanism in the U.S. is never coming back, right? And one of the things that's symptomatic of it is that you have seen recently the Republicans increasingly have to rely on the anti-democratic elements of the U.S. political system. Okay, that includes the Electoral College, right? It includes a Senate that is fundamentally anti-democratic. You've got 18% of the population of the U.S. represented by 52 senators. Like, can you imagine how, like, that is beyond just small states' rights? I mean, you've got a majority of states, a majority of senators, 52 senators representing less than a fifth of the population. That's fundamentally anti-democratic. Who appoints the Supreme Court judges? Well, after Barrett gets confirmed, 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices on the court will have been appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Okay, that's crazy. And they were confirmed by this anti-democratic Senate with a simple 51 to 49 majority. So, you have, and they increasingly have to rely on this because Republicans now, right, conservatives now in the U.S. are a minority. The majority of the U.S. is liberal. So they increasingly have to rely on the anti-democratic aspects of it. That includes like gerrymandering and all the other stuff that they do. So once Trump comes in and he's destroyed, I mean, imagine, since the Clinton years, how polarized the U.S. has been. Everything's been like red state, blue state, 50-50, just really, really close calls on the electoral votes and even the national vote. And just right now, what you're seeing is the in this. If you look at the polling now and you think about the kind of how polarized the U.S. is, and you're actually seeing these kinds of wide leads for Democrats in the polling, that tells you something. So it's going to be a very, very different party. Like the conservatives are going to be a very different party.
Yeah.
I don't think the Trump. I'm actually more optimistic than you are on this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to so it's kind of interesting. I mean, you use the word Republican and conservative sort of interchangeably there.
Yeah, that was on. Yeah, no.
No, but I think there is like an interesting conversation to have about what a Republican is versus what sort of a conservative philosophy is, which I don't think is going away, but it's going to need to find its footing somewhere. This Trump thing was really always just a fuck you protest.
Yeah, but we have examples. We have examples of that everywhere. So in Canada, we've got a conservative party, right? They're in power actually in the province that I'm in, right? And they're quite conservative. A lot of their financial policy and everything, it comes down to the financial and the fiscal stuff. So in a lot of these countries,
it's like a lot of these words get like mixed. I want to try something because a lot of these words like libertarianism and sort of free markets being sort of a Republican idea more so than sort of regulation. Yeah, there's that line in the sand. But I think underneath it all, talking about the general, like what is a conservative versus a progressive philosophy of life and political arrangements, but more so just life. I think that is where I don't know how it's going to manifest, but that is where whatever the Republican, I'm going to change that. Whatever the conservative philosophy manifests itself, and because we have a two-party system that's so entrenched, it'll be called Republican Party. I don't know the issues that it's going to win on in the future. If the woke sort of movement gets going too much, it's going to win. It's going to rebrand itself, mark us 10 years from now as the pro-science party that embraces sort of sex is real, gender is a construct, fine, but those kind of things that they're frankly just right about, they're going to run with those things. Right now, it's not a winning, it's just still sort of a fringe. It's a fringe element, and it's not going, it might not get mainstream. But my point about sort of conservatism versus republicanism, because you talked about the Tea Partiers, which were very sort of a free market ethos, who then, Donald Trump is the furthest thing from those people actually in practice, if you looked at the policies that he's championing. But the whatever kind of issues that come across our plate as humans over the next 50 years are conservative philosophy versus progressive philosophy. If I had to pin it down to its deepest impulse, this is sort of John Haidt, righteous mind kind of stuff, but it's almost as easy as sort of the impulse of humans playing God versus deferring to sort of the natural order of things. Even the free market is sort of deferring. We're going to fuck it up if we regulate it, right? Like, let's trust this kind of natural mathematical law of supply and demand, and the best answers will sort of emerge. It's not always perfect, but it does better than we can do. That it's all sort of the hesitation to get our fingers involved in it. You talk about something like stem cell research and humans playing God in this very literal way. You talk about abortion, which we could talk about. For me, it's not about the baby. I've written a lot about this before. It's about ultimate responsibility for the mother. But us ending a pregnancy in order to take away that cosmic responsibility is very much stepping in the seat of playing God. These are the kind of things that obviously split philosophically of the hesitation to do that or the sort of courage to do that. And we have a lot of things coming up this way. I mean, it manifests itself in the mask thing. There's some people who, the reporter puts the microphone in their face and it's like, why aren't you wearing a mask? And they're like, well, if I get it, I get it. Sort of like it's in God's hands. Obviously, they're misunderstanding the function of the mask is to protect other people. There's like a flaw there. But in their minds, it's kind of like, Jesus take the wheel kind of shrug. And again, I'm not dismissing it. It's just an impulse. It's a starting point of a lot of philosophical endeavors of we humans, like it's the Nietzsche God is dead challenge for progressives. I was like, okay, God is dead. Now, how do we run this ship morally? And a lot of people being like, no, we can't kill God. God is alive. Let's call it nature. Let's call it the free market. Let's call it this. That's going to regulate the system. That split is eternal. I don't think we're solving that with Donald. We're not even talking about that with Donald Trump. We're talking about a weird like moment in the nitty gritty. But wherever that energy won't go away, it's fine. I don't know how that's going to coalesce itself again in a world where it seems, and I'm going to like make a big claim here, neoliberal policies. A lot of people think these are sort of libertarian policies or free market for the world, but neoliberal policies of sort of taking control and being a little more aggressive. Let's leave aside sort of the social progressive stuff, but even the economic progressive stuff has been tremendously successful, and it's won the argument hands down. The isolationism and the those kind of borders has lost, and I think people have even sensed that. But they're a little defeated because now we have a whole bunch of other things to deal with on our plate of where we find our meaning in our lives for all, the farmers in the Midwest or whatever it is, or these other kind of social issues that are getting so hot button and so crazy. The mask could be one of them in particular. We could talk about things like abortion. The Republicans are, when they're going to want to win again, they're going to have to find the arguments where enough people agree that humans should not sort of be in the seat of God or the natural order of things, and find the issues to win around that. And I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be in the next 10 or 15 years. But frankly, if you're a philosophical liberal, regardless of all of the noise of since 9/11 and previously, like we're actually doing great. You know what I mean? Even with Trump in, like, it's this kind of an unstoppable train in the direction of, like you said, people are feeling like they're better now than 4 years ago. And that's not, the forces are bigger than any one man right now, which is why I said we actually are voting for sort of characters in a story more so than like crafters. Everyone's a neoliberal now. Let me put that on the table. Everyone.
Yeah. I like the fact that you can't really pin it down. I like the fact that you can't really define where these things are going to be. I mean, that's one important thing. That means that it has to start from scratch, like this sort of the order that you had in the past of what republicanism was. I mean, I think that's history. I think if there is, and this is again, of course, anything could happen. This entire conversation would be moot if Trump wins again. But to Spitz's point, that's for you, Mookie. But
I just want him to put money on it. I don't want to. I want to bet before we talk. I want to see it. Yeah.
Well, me and him do have a bet, so I think that'll be fun. But I think these things evolve, like what progressivism is now versus 50 years ago. Biden is you look at the Affordable Care Act, right? When that happened, it was considered socialized medicine, and it had a public option in it. And then Obama had to take out the public option because they thought with the public option, it would be too liberal and too progressive. And now the plan with the public option is too conservative. Right.
Yeah.
So these things do change with time. They change with events, and as I was saying, in Canada, Conservative Party is very different. David Cameron as a conservative is very different from conservative. A lot of European countries, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, and their conservatives are actually indistinguishable from the U.S. Democrats, right? So there are different aspects of it, but I don't think that. I agree with you. I think that the reason and the parties that are for science, I think that will ultimately win out. But I just don't see, after Trump goes away, I don't think Trumpism is going to go away. I think it'll still be there. I had, when I don't know if you saw when we talked to Steven Pinker on the Secular Jihadist podcast, and I asked him, because we were talking about jihadism and how jihadism is becoming more and more extreme. Even though there are fewer people who are jihadists, they're just a lot louder and they're a lot more intense. Like ISIS at that time was a really big thing. And then, you have these Republicans, they go on Tea Party, and then, the Trumpism. And I asked them, is this a backlash or is this a movement?
Right.
And we talked about it, because when you're in it, you can't tell the difference. It's hard to tell whether you're in a new movement that's going to take over, or whether this is just a backlash to something else. And when you have reactions upon reactions, and if you grow up in the Middle East or South Asia, you know what that's like with all these countries. I mean, it's a complete mess over there. What Faisal Muthar talks about all the time. But there's there was a backlash from Trump. You can be seen. I don't know if 10 years from now we're going to look back at this and say, well, Trump was a backlash to the 8 years of Obama. And then you had this wokeness phenomenon that rose up against a huge backlash to Trump. And then eventually Sleepy Joe showed up, and everything normalized. one thing became more,
mean,
more
I
amplified,
think
the other. There's no way to tell. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the specifics are always, totally unpredictable. So I won't pick the issues of what they're going to be in 10 years, but maybe I'll amend a little of what I said before, of that eternal fight of sort of conservative philosophy versus progressive philosophy as just the starting point. The way that usually manifests, where it might feel a little more tangible to people, is just the freedom versus sort of fascism tug of war. That's the extremes of it, but that's the mask mandate versus let people do what they want mandate. That I mean, all of the Trump energy, and I see some ridiculous flags down here, but you'll see a Confederate flag design with like "Don't tread on me" snake in the middle, which is such a confused symbol, by the way, because it's literally like a Ben Franklin political cartoon who was clearly not in the Confederacy on a Confederate flag. It's like, but
he was an elitist. He was a wine drinker who spoke French and had a common law relationship.
Don't ruin it for the truck driver. But you get what the impulse of the "don't tread on anything" is, that just sort of like, fuck off, don't tell me what to do. That is very strong in America. Obviously, when the pandemic started to show up in the world, I was, you didn't have to be Nostradamus to be like, oh, America is going to suck at this. With or without Trump, we were always going to suck. It's much worse with Trump, but we're going to suck at this because sort of the founding image of America of the cowboy who gets to be his own boss and there's no king. It's the anti-king sort of founding. That ethos is still very strong here, and very, of course, strong in the South as well. But that conservative ethic, that is coming, actually, because we could talk about China in particular if we want, but the regulation of information or the regulation of health problems. This is not going to be our last pandemic, unfortunately. Clearly, it just was bound to happen. The kind of challenges that are facing us, even automation, globalization, they require, frankly, a level of collective cooperation to solve those problems that's just woven into the problems. You cannot solve climate change individually. You can't. And you cannot solve a pandemic individually. And you cannot solve global terrorism individually. The kind of challenges we're facing are different than a flood on your farm that you can fix if you build the dam yourself, which frankly was the human experience for a very long time of like, I will take care of myself. But just like to wrap up sort of that point is that I think this is just an objective truth that the problems in our modern world require a level of cooperation, which will feel like coercion to a lot of people, and a paternalistic kind of, we're telling you what to do, we're telling you to wear a mask, we just have to do this, it's in your best interest. That rubs people the wrong way who want their freedom and want their sort of piece of land. And the Republicans could win there if they gather around that. Frankly, Trump he's not even the poster child for that. He's always been a fuck you. But if you find a more sort of cowboy individualism candidate who really runs with this old school kind of like get off my lawn, Clint Eastwood kind of vibe, they could win against what they feel is a paternalistic counter to them. Just again, reactionary. But in the end, science has this way of winning. Let's say Joe Biden wins, and let's say it's not too crazy for the next few months, and he's inaugurated in January. And let's just say the first week he institutes a mandate to wear masks. The country will be that'll be a signal to a lot of Trump voters of like, oh shit, this is China now, and this is a real deal. But the truth is, if we lived in a different time where we weren't at each other's throats, a mask mandate, and I don't know, we could talk about COVID, may be the perfect policy thing that actually scientifically would like help us the most.
Yeah,
but we don't even
seatbelts.
Yeah, but we don't even get to to debate or ponder the possibility of that truth, because it's all couched in the freedom versus authoritarianism bent. So that's another way to, but even on top of that, it's not different than what I said, the sort of playing God versus not, because I'm talking about who gets to play God. Well, the person we elected gets to tell us what to do with our lives. It's the same philosophical starting point, but that's the manifestation that always comes at step one, at least in America, of freedom versus regulation. But unfortunately, in a country also with a total failing educational system, it's getting harder and harder to trust the masses to make the right decisions, just giving it to the free market. So that's a whole other systemic problem that I worry about. And it's why I get into some entanglements with some of, let's call it unfettered free speech advocates, because I'm like, you mean these people? The people who couldn't tell that Rudy Giuliani and a New York Post story was fake? Like,
oh my God, yeah.
You know? So,
well, I mean, we have like I have like 15 more minutes, so I wanted to get to like one of the things that you're talking about, like the aspect of cooperation versus individual liberty. I mean, internationally, there's, you know, again, you've got the nationalism and the protectionism versus globalism. So another, you know, we've got one dominant commenter here. So he's saying, you know, what are you talking about? Anti-globalism is sweeping the world.
Just what?
But I don't think that it's working. So here's one of the things that I thought was really indicative of how this is playing out is the peace deals with the UAE and Bahrain. You know, the Israel and the peace deals. Like
he's too nervous, by the way. I'm just gonna put that out there.
Shots fired. He's gonna be back. He's gonna be back, and then, you know, you're gonna be there. But
no, I don't care.
Yeah, I know. We'll have. We just need to all hang out together again. So you know, the way that this alliance happened is, you know, you have Israel, and then you have the UAE, and you have Bahrain all together. Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. Yeah, so three of. And these are all like the economic powerhouses of the Middle East, right? These are like some of the richest, richest countries, and they're coming together with this economic cooperation. And Saudi Arabia, of course, allowed. You know, they've been working together with Israel very openly now. It was covert for the longest time. They've allowed Israel to fly over, use their airspace. And then on the other hand, you have Iran and Syria and these, you know, sort of, okay, you know, we hate Israel, we're going to fight against it, resist them, caliphate, you know, end times, and they have that sort of resistance philosophy against it, and it's those are the two things that are going against each other right now. And you have this sort of cooperative economic cooperation across several different states that may not be aligned politically or ideologically in any way, and on the other side you have this really old school Game of Thrones style mentality. And that's the conflict. And there's no competition. There's absolutely no competition.
Well, I think there's something new on the horizon. So to Mookie's point, by the way, I just tend to analyze systems at a much more zoomed out level than he does. Yes, anti-globalism is sweeping the world. I think it's a backlash trend. I think if you look in the sweep, it's going to be a blip in this march. But I think there is something new to talk about. And actually, it was in, you know, Hans Rosling's work. He's the Gapminder guy. He unfortunately died a few years ago. Amazing site, gapminder.org. I like spend all my days on it. Amazing data that you can look through history and look at sort of. I'll just tell you, like the chart that comes up when you first go to it, to their tools, is GDP per capita on one of the axes and life expectancy on the other axis. The size of the bubbles is the population of the country that you're talking. But the great part about it is you can drag through time on it, so you can see sort of the world move.
I have seen this. Yes.
He's incredible. He unfortunately died of pancreatic cancer years ago. His kids took up his project. Anyway, his book that came out actually after he died, that his kids finished, was called Factfulness. And I remember in the opening, he you know, he's just a data guy, and he just laid out that he's like, democratic open systems, we cannot say that they are the only way, or even maybe the best way, to move from the bottom left of that graph, which is sick and poor, to the top right of that graph, which is wealthy and healthy, anymore. And if we're going to, because of China, frankly, and a lot of other systems that are doing it and getting healthier and wealthier without democracy and without what I've been talking about of sort of a globalist approach. I mean, they're a weird case, obviously, for a lot of reasons, China, but they're not the only ones, right? And if we're going to defend sort of the liberal global project, it's going to need its own kind of moral defense. I think China is a wrench in the gears in a pretty major way for what we're talking about, of things like the Paris Accord. We pulled out of it for whatever, it's a specific climate change thing. Who cares? We're still sort of all trying to solve climate change in a way globally. Something like the TPP, which, you know, came and went or whatever. These NAFTA, these deals across nations to trade with some sort of baseline for human rights or whatever. We're not done seeing that. Where I think it feels like an inevitable march towards a global cooperative society. And Mookie's right. There is a backlash to that. Obviously, Brexit and everywhere else we're seeing these nationalist movements. But science has a way of just not caring the kind of arrangements that we monkeys group ourselves in. It's just going to present problems for us. And I don't think people are that, happy with the way the world has responded to this pandemic. I don't think they're going to be happy with the way that we respond to more challenges that are global kind of threats that require a kind of global cooperation. If something like human rights or automation or whatever it is, if something like human rights can get into that mix, which maybe it isn't a little bit, then these international trade agreements might also be seen in that same kind of light of that it's a crisis that the kid who makes your iPhone is poor and working in a sweatshop. And so we're going to work out some trade deal because we still want the iPhones, but we're willing to sacrifice. We're not going to buy the iPhone if it comes from that kid. You might start seeing some more of that stuff globally, but China is a major wrench in the gears that doesn't play that same kind of way. And so I don't know how that's going to change this march towards something like a global liberal politic. If we ever can get there, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's the one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing. I know Melissa Chen writes a lot about this, so I'm interested in having that conversation, see what happens with China. But so the last thing for you I want to discuss, because this is everybody's talking about. Do you watch the show The Circus on Showtime?
No, I watched it. I mean, I don't really watch like any TV now, but I watched it a little bit in 2016 and it was amazing, like during that campaign.
Yeah. It's if you watch it now, I mean, right now they've got the new season going on. Mark Halperin's not in there anymore because he got Me Too'd, but John Halleman's still on there and Alex Wagner's still there. And they had Alex Wagner actually talk to some Trump supporters who were swearing that this is like the Civil War is nothing compared to what's coming, and they're armed and they're sitting there. They completely think COVID is a hoax. It was incredible the stuff that they were talking about. So this is a big question right now. There've been a lot of things written about it. Mars is asking, assuming Biden does win, I can see Trump screaming about a rigged election. Do you see pandemonium afterwards and maybe a need to forcibly remove him? What could be the political fallout from that? And everybody has a view on this. Bill Maher has been talking about it for years. What do you think?
So I did an episode, literally called "How to Avoid a Civil War" with Mike Salenker, who's a video or a board game designer. He did Axis and Allies and a bunch of big games. Really interesting guy. And we went through his 4 scenarios, which all had historical sort of analogies that were terrible, like the Irish Troubles and the Russian Revolution, and the American Civil War and things like that. So I started, I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but I started that episode after Ruth died, having like the shiver down my spine of like, oh, we're fucked. Like this is going to be incredibly bad. It still could be, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political analyst, so just like, take what I say as just another voice in the whirlwind, but I really think
it's called professional novice, by the way.
Professional novice on this topic
that are not in their wheelhouse normally.
You're just taking my pulse. There's going to be some violence. Obviously, there's going to be some fucking problems. Like let's start with that. But I don't think we're going to see something like a civil war. I mean, the worst case scenarios, and this is the analogy that I really wanted to look at in that episode is. I've traveled a lot, as you know, and I've been in a lot of countries that do not function well, and we are not there yet. Of course, these words get overplayed a lot of civil wars and Holocausts and stuff, and we're not, and we shouldn't overplay the hand. But the signs are there, the analogies are there. Spend a lot of time in places like East Africa, and the elements are there. And in some ways, the Trump years has given, maybe I'm not the only one, but it's given me a different level of sympathy and empathy for the people in those kinds of countries. Because sometimes you look at them and you're like, what the fuck? Why you have a dictator? Like, there's millions of you. Why don't you just do something about it? Like, you don't have to live with that guy. But you realize when you're in this kind of situation that you can't just overthrow someone. Because if you do, you've become what you hate, right? You have to on some level, play by the rules that you've set in place, because those are the rules that you just want everyone to play by. Those are the rules you all agreed to play by. But when someone is not playing by those rules and they're in power, that's the real conundrum. And we have this kind of social contract that you're just going to leave peacefully. And when he, in those early debates, refused to sort of agree to a peaceful transition, although he's sort of hedged on it now, thankfully, like that should be a non-starter, obviously, for anyone in the history of politics in any country. That's the part of the game that you just have to do. Because if you do not, like, we can't play the game. We can't play the game. And I use the sports analogy. If you shoot a 3-point shot and your foot was on the line and the referee called it a 2-point shot and you demand that you won and you won't pass the ball back to the referee, the game will stop unless you just agree at some point to play by the rules, even if you think the ref got it wrong. So if Trump is that person, I don't think where we started this conversation about WWE, let's put it this way. I hope he finds the right storyline to end this with, where he hands the keys back to Vince McMahon. He's looking for it. I think and hope. I think in some ways, maybe this week is that he's realizing he's going to lose. I don't you get that kind of feeling that he realizes, like,
in all honesty, like I'll say this, and this is going to absolutely, sorry, Spitz, this is going to trigger you like crazy. I thought he was going to lose in January. I thought he was going to lose before COVID.
I wasn't so sure. I feel like
I wasn't sure, but just looking at how 2018 turned out. And we're not just talking about polls. We're talking about all these elections, like the Rust Belt where he won, like that. What happened in 2018 there, like up and down, like Senate, House, governorships.
The 2018 polls, there was already a blue wave. People aren't going to forget.
2019, all of that. Like, so I thought, I agree with James Carville. I mean, he was going to lose then too. It's just that the pandemic came and obviously
he's been looking. And to Mars's question and to Bill Mars, I mean, he's been looking for the way to sell the country back to Vince McMahon or whoever was in charge at first, the politicians, the way things were, but still walk away the winner and the big tough guy who gave the noogie to the other guy, shaved his head and humiliated his opponent. He's been looking for that for a year. Right? Can you imagine a Trump concession speech? Can you just imagine it? Only if it feels like the end. Only if it feels like he sold the country back for twice its value, which is what he did on WWE. That's the character that Donald Trump knows. And I don't know. He can't find it, which is why I can't imagine it either. Because him losing an election, claiming it's rigged and that he really won somehow and walking away, I'm just hoping that's satisfying enough for him. All those jokes people tell on Twitter of like, we should build a Truman Show bubble and put him in it and just tell him he's still president. Like, that's us admitting, like, we don't know how to end the story either for you, dude. So like, you get to be president forever in your own mind. But I think that's what if he can find that would be great. If he can find a way. And I think to Mars's point, he's going to find it, because and here's my prediction. He's going to continue to hold these kinds of pro-Trump wrestling style rallies long after he's out of office. I mean, he could, while Biden's in office, he should do it. He can do it. He's going to do these weird, like, I was the best president ever rallies. I think that's where he's going to find his ending to his storyline of, like, he sold the country back to Biden, but like, look, he's still the king really of his own domain. The only way he's going to be able to do it is claim that the numbers were fake and rigged, which, if that's enough for him, that's going to be enough for him, because it's going to be humiliating. I mean, the COVID thing was honestly humiliating for him. And that moment that he walked to the helicopter to go to the hospital and he didn't stop to talk to the press was the moment where I was like, oh, he's sick, right? Like, he always stops and talks to the press. And this would have been the one time where he'd been like, they're making me do it. I'm totally fine. And then he admitted, he's like, I wasn't feeling so good. Like, the dude was genuinely a little afraid maybe that he was going to die or something.
I mean, that's what they said, but
I don't humiliated. So I don't know how this ends either. I don't. To Mars's point, I hope, just as like one caution, there's going to be some violence. I mean, hopefully it's not as bad as like Gretchen getting kidnapped or some awful, like, there could be some big events that spark that. Here, I'll give you one from the other side. Amy Coney Barrett gets assassinated by someone on the left and it triggers a civil war. Like, we can let our mind wander into these places that are really dark, and it's useful to do it. I did it on that podcast, as I said, in order to hopefully not, notice the parts, to not let it get to that bad. You're going to see clashes. Obviously, they're going to be in Portland. People who like those people that you're watching on the circus, I'm sure a few of them are going to do something really stupid and they're going to end up hurting some people. There's going to be some stories on election day of fights and maybe even guns at polling places. There's going to be pockets of this, and you're going to have Donald Trump amplifying something, and you're going to have Joe Biden trying to keep people calm. I don't see it spiraling into some sort of civil pandemonium. We might get legal pandemonium, and it's a little fascinating about mail-in voting and all this kind of stuff. Actually, one more thing on the mail-in voting. I think it's going to hugely increase the numbers because, frankly, like we don't, this is famous. Like in America, it's not a day off. People have work, even in remote work. I'm sure they're going to have to do shit.
That's voting, also a form of voter suppression, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. People are lazy. And frankly, the mail-in vote is like, it's a way for some lazy people to be like, cool, I did it. And it's, for millennials, putting a stamp on things might be it's like a little hard, but it's a little easier than waiting in a line for 5 hours. I'm going to vote in person, by the way, but
it's like all of this is such uncharted waters. I mean, you don't even know, when Trump says, okay, it's going to be rigged, it's rigged. I mean, how many people are going to think, oh, yeah, it's going to be rigged anyway, might as well not show up? I mean, there's so many different dynamics that could play out. But you know what? I have so there's how the flip side of Trump wins, and as you gave that example specifically. So yeah,
Trump legitimately wins. Trump legitimately wins. I don't know. I don't know who. It's good. I think that's the ugliest scenario because I think the left will go a little nuts. That'll be humiliating and frankly just terrible it's just pure chaos.
It's actually so terrible that the thought of Trump actually winning that. I think that's why people are doing the devil's advocate thing so much. Democrats are doing it so much because they just don't want to. If they say, I don't know, Trump's going to win, if that's the position that they take, then if Trump loses, they're not going to feel humiliated. They'll be very very happy. But if he wins and they're prepared and they can say they're right. But if they say that what we're saying is Biden is going to win and then Trump wins, it's a lot worse. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap up over here. I gotta answer this one last thing that it's saying, and he's tweeting in all caps, right? Mm-hmm. So Chris is just pointing that out. He's saying that the polls are almost the same now as they were at this time with Hillary. They're actually not. National polling for Hillary at this time was around when she went into the election. She was about 3 points ahead. She won about 2 point something points. So they're kind of on the mark. You're right about the battleground states, Wisconsin and Michigan and so on. But the difference was that there were a lot of third-party candidates then. They had a significant share of the vote, and Hillary was not at 50%. She was not at 50%. Right. So that makes a big difference. And there were a lot more independent voters. So and those things are significant. But as you said, let's see. And in addition to those swing states,
I want to look it up now because I want to know how much money Mookie can make if he actually puts his money where his mouth is.
The betting,
So on Predict It right now, which is like the big betting site in the U.S., you could buy shares for Trump winning at 40 cents on the dollar, which is actually a little higher than I thought it is. So, go put a couple $1,000s on it and turn that into a lot more $1,000. Biden's at 65 cents on the dollar right now. Just went up a cent today. So if Mookie, I want to see the betting slips. If he really wants to put his money where his mouth is here, he can make a lot of money. The odds are very much in
let's do it.
It's like a, 3 to 1. I don't know. I can't do the math in my head right now. But yeah, I mean, listen, that could be true. The variables of 2016 to 2020 is 4 years of experience of Trump being the actual president. Like that's variable to me. And, the polls at this time, frankly, I don't know the polls at this time in 2016. Let's not talk about the Comey letter, which also hurt her or whatever. People saying that they were going to vote for Hillary at this point and then not doing it a month later because they you could lie to a pollster or you're sort of lying to yourself that you're actually going to do it, I think are a lot higher right now. Again, I don't think you're seeing a wave of Biden enthusiasm. You're seeing a wave of we are exhausted of these 4 years. And I guess we'll see. But the problem is with Mookie, we're not going to see on election night, likely. Although I wonder if it's 50-50 on election night, he knows he lost, right? We might. I think it's going to be such an an avalanche that we will know on election night. But we are still 2 weeks out now, 2.5 weeks?
2 weeks out. The next debate is on Thursday. And Thursday after the debate, Spitz is going to be back on here, and we're going to talk about that. And he's going to talk about how Trump rocked it. That's what I'm predicting, even though he did not think that Trump was he did think Savannah Guthrie really sort of decimated Trump at the at his town hall. But anyway, so we're going to see. Yeah. We'll have that back, and would love to have you back on too if you have more thoughts.
I think he said Trump rocked the first one too. He said a lot of nice things, and the poll certainly sort of went the other way. So I don't know.
I don't know. But the polls, like that's the thing. He's skeptical.
I know.
About the polls.
You could discount the polls all you want. I guess we'll just see on.
We'll have to see.
Day. But
that's why
none of those are pollsters. That's the thing. I trust the professionals. If there are people who do that professionally, and we're all looking at the same stuff. So that's the best we can do. You're either going to trust the polls or not.
We didn't talk about this, but it says far left won't vote. This is from Alex. Far left won't vote for Biden.
That's probably a good point. Yeah.
But they actually are. Most of them actually are. I think there are about 12 to 15% of people who are Bernie supporters who are just nobody else, and that's around the same number as
if you're
2016.
Thinking of the sort of crazy protesters on the street, and they're likely not voting for Biden now either. But
significantly, the lesser of the two evils crowd, that they're both the same. Oh, they're both the same. They're both the same. They broke significantly for Trump instead of Hillary in 2016. This time they're going overwhelmingly for Biden, the ones who don't like either candidate. So that's also another one. Anyway, Jay, I got to finish this because I got to, I got someone babysitting my kid. Cool. It's a very practical limitation, nothing to do with you. But
I recommend everyone watching this, go back the YouTube rabbit hole and watch. You still hear me? Just watch Donald Trump WWE videos of his storyline there, and just just know that was a character that was written indistinguishable from the guy who's currently in the office, and just watch that storyline. And if you could figure out how to end it any better for him, send him a line, because he needs a writer right now. And it ended peacefully. Peaceful transition of power back to Vince McMahon happened on the show, but only because maybe we just need him to shave Joe Biden's head. If Joe Biden would just let him shave his head, problem fucking solved.
All the plugs. Well, it's never going to happen the other way around. No. So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much. There's quite a few of you watching this, a lot more than I thought. So, cool. Thanks everybody, and we will come back. Jay, man, just come on just to talk.
Man.
Shit, I think it'll be good. Maybe we'll do another topic. Maybe we'll talk a little bit before the election or after the election, and I don't know. We'll see. I really want to know where you think the woke crowd is going to go. I'd like to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that was really fun because my podcast, if you find it, it's very philosophical, heady stuff. I'm releasing one either tomorrow or the next day on memetics with Susan Blackmore, super philosophical stuff. So it's fun to just sort of get in the mud and talk politics, but also I like to try to drag it out to some of that deeper stuff as well. But no, it's super fun anytime.
No, but I like the way you integrate it all. I think it's great. That's a perspective that helps, that you don't see from a lot of other people. So that's great. Anyway, Thank you. Thanks everybody. And I'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
And I'm going to